and then you have started growing your own vegetables there. Now, because you're tending to your own vegetable farm in the middle of a dense developed city, you have automatically developed a sense of attachment with that. And it's not just growing your vegetables. I mean, you're seeing the plant grow every single day.
Right.
There is a sense of anticipation, there is hope, there is a sense of contentment when you get to eat that same fruit that you yourself have kind of planted and tended to, and then you feel like this is what life is all about. Maybe think about Bandra Fort. It is conserved now, but just a conserved fort could have just been another fort if there was not understanding of how you can rejuvenate that space. So then you are kind of roping in people, say an NCPA and a West Side, doing shows there, which is sponsored. People are coming there, people are engaging in that space, people are feeling the sense of cultural context. They are being more aware of their surroundings, which will make them more responsible to take care of these surroundings.
Correct.
And at the same time, you've also roped in people who are ready to put in the money. Are certain trees creating enclosures? Are certain tall trees near to a wall where the roots may damage the wall, or where that wall may not allow the foliage to really spread out to its best capacity? Is there a sense of enclosure that where someone wants to find a cozy spot, they can go and sit there? Or is there like a large space where you just want to filter in sunlight and just want to bask in that? So what are these different characters of space? What is the materiality and how does that work?
Hello and welcome to Landscape Guru, a podcast where we explore people, ideas, and stories that shape the world of landscape architecture. In today's episode, we are joined by architect Swapna Hankare, someone who believes city offers numerous layers and how people and landscape are a media to express that. In conversation with her, we also described about how community participation is significant in designing our spaces and surroundings. So stay tuned till the end and you will definitely find some interesting takeaways from the episode. Hello Swapna
Hi.
ma'am, welcome to
Hello.
the show.
Thank you so much for having me here.
Yes. So let's start with something very basic. How would you describe landscape architecture from your lens? If someone is not aware about what exactly this field is, how would you describe our profession?
Okay, landscape architecture. I'll start with a definition first because it is as basic as anyone can understand.
Right.
So, landscape architecture is a science and it is an art. Now, when we say an art, obviously we think about painting or sculptures, right? It is something that soothes your soul.
Correct.
Landscape does that to an individual. And science, because it involves a lot of other technicalities to just get it in place. But it is not like architecture. We are not building built form as such.
Correct.
We are working with open outdoor spaces. So it is mostly the design of outdoor spaces. But then is this almost similar to what a naturescape is? Because you might end up with that. Just a beautiful looking mountainscape or a river is also a landscape. And you can imprint it on paper. So it's not just a pretty picture. It is something that is designed. And then designed for what? Do you design for no reason? No. You design for functionality.
Correct.
You design to make spaces maybe more sustainable. You design for beautification or aesthetic purpose. So when we talk about all of these aspects, what comes in? Function. Function for whom? For the users of the space. So the prime stakeholders are those who are very integral to the design process. So then who are these? The people who may be regular neighborhood people or just you and me. I might just plant something in my balcony and that becomes an intervention of landscape as well.
Correct.
So it needs to be functional because it needs to cater to the people and their needs, aspirations, likes, dislikes, preferences. Likewise, sustainability. Today, we don't have a choice but to be sustainable in this wake of climate change.
Right.
We need to provide for the future. We really can't escape that, and it has to become a way of life. So, why does landscape become important there? Because landscape deals with live elements like trees. Trees keep growing, and these are the most important factor that becomes a mitigating order for any kind of be it increased carbon levels or be it increased noise pollution. Trees are those which absorb all of this.
Correct.
So they are an inherent part of landscape. But likewise, if we say landscape as such, it's molding of land. It's land and scape, scaping land or
Correct.
sculpting land. So when we start sculpting land, what happens? You end up creating maybe certain crevices where water can accumulate. So water becomes an inherent part of the landscape. And because you've got water some places, you've also had vegetation, you've had trees growing. So all of these, which are the elements of landscape, become a landscape in general. And when you're using all these elements to your benefit for people, to allow certain beautiful experiences, that's where you come across the whole idea of landscape design.
Correct. As you said, it is an art. So as a painter or a sculptor, if we think of them as an artist, they create that art out of their interest or whatever is there hidden in their ideology or a soul satisfaction.
Correct.
But we as architects or landscape architects, we practice this art for others, for the use of others or the functionality which is serving other living organisms, not
True.
only humans but also
True.
everybody who is
Yes.
present in
Yes.
the living this.
Yes, that's true. And with landscape, what happens is that, see, if you're doing architecture, it's probably restricted to a house or a large commercial project or a large master plan. But
Town
with
plan.
landscape, the scales are as varied, like macro level to micro
Correct.
level. So even if you might tomorrow have an indoor plant that is giving you oxygen, it's a landscape intervention
Correct.
at a very macro level, right? But you might have a balcony or a window box or things which show your identity. When you look at your house from below, you probably can identify that
Yes.
house is mine, sort of,
Right.
because it's so green, or a lot of flowering plants happening there. So that also helps define the identity of the user. And then the range of scale can be as wide as gardens or large parks or
Correct.
national parks or regional parks. So you might end up doing something like, or you ought to probably be more responsible as a citizen, and you may undertake preservation or conservation of large scale landscape ecosystems like maybe mangroves or wetlands, and that also becomes landscape intervention. So the scale is so varied that it's really not definable into a typical box sort of a zone.
Yeah. So you started with architecture and then you shifted to, or you became more focused towards landscape architecture. So what was that moment that led you to this decision?
So I'll tell you how I came into architecture. My both parents have been architects,
Oh,
and they had done their town planning in the UK in 1960s. So ever since I was a child, we have just had books related to architecture, drawings lying around.
wow.
We used to travel to places that were architecturally oriented. Not that they wanted to imbibe in it, but it was just a way of
Yeah.
life. And friend circle was all architects. So it was by default that we were in that ecosystem, me and my brother. My
Okay.
brother was very sure he wanted to be an architect. I wanted to be a doctor. But at that stage where I had to choose, I realized that माझं drawing पण चांगलं आहे. Let's go for architecture. And it was a very momentary and a very spontaneous decision, but I landed up in the same field. And I enjoyed it. I was good at drawing, so I enjoyed it. I mean, that's the typical
Yeah.
criteria if you're good at drawing. But yes, I did enjoy it a lot. After I graduated, I worked with smaller offices, so I got a lot of hands-on experience. And one such office where I worked for a very long term, Keer Designs Group, is where we worked on this really large scale project at Mauritius, which was the Intercontinental Hotel. And we did everything from architecture to interiors. We were overseeing work there. It was a very interesting exposure. There were a lot of Indians because even the MEP consultants were Volta. So it was all a whole very Indianized. The client was an Indian who was based there. So it was very exciting because we were in a different country. We were working on a large scale project, a very small team of just 4 of us. And there, landscape was practiced by another firm, which was a Mauritian firm.
Okay.
And I used to think that what they have done, I could have easily done, but I can't do it because I'm not a landscape architect. So that is what kind of pinched me, and that stayed. And then when I joined as a faculty, I had the scope because that is when Raheja started a part-time course.
Okay.
So also what happens when I graduated, I was doing I was doing a course, I was teaching. I started teaching almost immediately afterwards in a small scale interiors course. So I was teaching, I was working. There were lots of things. Now after say 10 years down the line, when you have to stop earning, it becomes really difficult. So I was definitely not looking at taking a break and going and studying. But luckily, Raheja started the part-time course here, which allowed me to work alongside and pursue my master's. So I jumped at that opportunity, and that's how I took up landscape. And then it was inherent. My mother used to teach landscape. So wherever we would go, oh, that is Queen's Flower, that is Gulmohar. I kind of almost knew a little bit of
have that
some of the
perspective
species.
to looking
Yes.
at things.
So I enjoyed it even more, and that's how landscape architecture happened.
Nice. And then okay, so you first moved towards teaching and
Yes.
then you moved towards
Yes. So I actually came into teaching almost immediately. I had not even got my results when one of my mentors, Milind Amle sir, literally dragged me into teaching. He said, "Pass होणार आहे. त्याचा काही doubtच नाहीये. You just better start." So I started with the part-time course, which was an interior design course. I was teaching that till almost 2016 when I joined Academy of Architecture. So yeah, that was like a big shift because after juggling profession and teaching, like a full-time job, it was a little bit of a shift. But then that's where I got more into formal teaching, full-time course, and then I pursued my master's because I realized I need to keep myself updated, as well as there was an opportunity to learn landscape.
Correct. So when we talk about landscape, it is not only about trees or shrubs or land, it is also about community gathering that happens in outdoor spaces. So we often talk about community gatherings or community spaces, but it is rarely practiced in real world. So what do you think, how community interactions is linked to the landscape design?
Landscape offers the maximum engagement of community, I would say, because who doesn't like to be in a green space, or who doesn't like to sit under a tree, or even stand at a tapri which is below a large tree shade.
Correct.
You are always connected. You have always had associations with trees. Even as a child, you have climbed on branches. You have probably had that one tree in your village house which is very special to you.
Yeah.
So you are always associated with trees. So hence landscape, I think, is even more so connected with humans or with communities. So when we are looking at community engagement as such, say for example a neighborhood park. I mean, I can give example of the Nana Nani Park in Shivaji Park, which I
Ah.
cross often, and my aunt is a regular visitor there.
Okay.
There are so many activities. Their life revolves around going there. So they really look forward to going there because it's a park, but it's also a social system for them.
Correct.
It is their kids are not here. They are at different countries working. So for them, meeting those friends or meeting those people they know or doing activities which otherwise they wouldn't do inside the house becomes very, very crucial. So the engagement could happen in what ways? They have these multiple types of workshops, which are right from yoga to medical awareness to different things, which happen within that green space which is created. Now, this green space is not just created because it's a garden and there needs to be a lawn. It's multifunctional. So just the understanding of those stakeholders and what they need has led to the formation of this space which can adapt. And then it's also a space where all types of people can come in.
Correct.
So you may have someone come in on a wheelchair with an
Right.
attendant.
Right.
A differently abled person may also come there and sit. You may they don't allow all age groups, but just next to it are all youngsters. So you do get to interact with all age groups. You do get to interact with all types of people. It is inclusive. It is a place of democracy because you can voice your opinions. You can have varied workshops there. You can have health camps there. Just an example of the Nana Nani Park. There are so many other things that you can do. So these become places around which these individuals' life revolves, and hence those landscape spaces become so important.
Correct.
And they are in the midst of greenery, so they are kind of protected. They are still screened off. They are wellness oriented because there is so much of a better environment. So they quite enjoy these kind of spaces. So hence I feel these community engagements become very important. Now when we are designing a landscape, then does community engagement become crucial? Obviously we are designing for the community.
Correct.
So what are the needs or the likes or the preferences of that community? For example, if we were to maybe think about Bandra Fort, it is conserved now. But just a conserved fort could have just been another fort if there was not understanding of how you can rejuvenate that space. So then you are kind of roping in people, say an NCPA and a West Side, doing shows there, which is sponsored. People are coming there. People are engaging in that space. People are feeling the sense of cultural context. They are being more aware of their surroundings, which will make them more responsible to take care of these surroundings.
Correct.
And at the same time, you've also roped in people who are ready to put in the money. And then when you become so kind of attached to the space,
Correct.
you ought to take care of that space. So morally it becomes your responsibility to become a stakeholder and a steward for that space, to kind of maintain it or make sure it thrives well and so on. So community engagement does become very
Yeah.
important there.
So as you said, the activities like urban farming or such workshops in open spaces make people feel their ownership over their surroundings, and then
Yes.
they react towards it in a way, and also the kind of impact that they have on their daily life is something very important, and it is something I think you must be taking it in your studios. So how do you
I would just like to add
Yeah.
how urban farming can
Yeah.
become important. We are not practicing it to the extent that probably it should be practiced. But I think in cities like Bangalore and all, you've got these lots of pockets where you've subdivided pockets and you've allowed a family to become a steward for that plot of land. And then you have started growing your own vegetables there. Now, because you're tending to your own vegetable farm in the middle of a dense developed city, you have automatically developed a sense of attachment with that. And it's not just growing your vegetables. I mean, you're seeing the plant grow every single day.
Right.
There is a sense of anticipation, there is hope, there is a sense of contentment when you get to eat that same fruit that you yourself have kind of planted and tended to. And then you feel like this is what life is all about,
So this
right?
happens in residential complex?
Yes, it can. There was also another project in Pune, Nanded city, which had also proposed these kind of the open area was developed into urban farms, sort of, and that is one of the best ways to engage, because then you are taking care of the space, you are growing your own stuff, you feel the sense of ownership towards that. You don't need to go to another place to just farm for yourself. You
Right.
are doing that right in the middle of your urban context. So this becomes very potential. And what are you doing? You are increasing the supply of food, which is the sustainable development goal. You are
Right.
kind of, with smaller interventions, you are kind of really helping the larger goal.
So this majorly depends on the user, right?
Yes.
Like we as designers, we may propose such amenities to the residents, but are they so much inclined or interested in investing their time and energy into such things?
They should be. I mean, they would be, I guess. That's when you would choose to be a part of it. You cannot
Correct.
compulsorily make someone do it, but who would not? I mean, COVID time, everybody started becoming plant parents because you couldn't go out, right?
Correct.
So you were getting smaller elements to or to which you could impart care and affection and watch it grow.
Right.
So whoever would have the choice, largely they would have a choice. They would always opt for these kind of projects.
Correct. So we talked about spaces like Shivaji Park. In the heart of Mumbai, there are a lot of such spaces which are what do you say, overlooked, or they are currently treated as just heritage ruins. So, for example, mill lands or port lands, port areas. So, how do you think that these areas can be revived truly and in a meaningful way to engage community?
Definitely, Mumbai is incredible. I mean, it's got so much density of built fabric. It's got so much disparity where it comes to the economic backgrounds of people. It's got chaos. It's got traffic. It's got everything that you would not want in a city, but still everyone loves Mumbai, right? It is the city of dreams, and now these dreams obviously do come true if you work towards it. So
Correct.
Bombay, especially, I mean Mumbai, the historic background is so rich. It started as an industrial setup, and then ports happened, and they enhanced, and industries got even more reinforced, and then that's how it attracted all of the heavy density built form, and it just evolved, and it's evolving. It's always in a state of flux. In this process, what happened is, over time, certain areas just started to become redundant because of higher land prices that evolved, a market transforming, and then these parcels were more potential to be developed as commercial areas, for example, the mills. And then eventually they started shutting down one after the other. It was major transformation. Lot of people whose lives were very closely connected to these kind of land uses, and then you suddenly have an alien kind of structure there.
Correct.
So then what is it that keeps people connected to these kind of pockets? It's even a smallest garden, or it's this entire tract of land, a large mill parcel. These are so potential. If they are reinvented, they could have more job opportunities, they could have more better infrastructure. The same people who lost their jobs could probably be a part of these same areas in terms of architecture, but it could also allow potential for so much more landscape. in a city like ours where we are just going skywards, and the pockets of open areas are reducing at such a fast pace, it becomes really, really important that we exploit these which are redundant areas right now. They have a lot of potential. They have, say the port lands, they have one type of an ownership, but they have complex regulations. But they have also had a lot of historic backdrop. They've got a lot of cultural significance based on the kind of occupations that were practiced there. So all of these become very, very potential for urban regeneration, and which is underway. There are a lot of plans which have happened over years, large scale plans, but there are a lot of probably regulatory constraints. There are governance constraints. There is a lot of capital that will go into development of this. There might be a lot more of infrastructure that is needed for this.
Correct.
So right now the focus is to not just revamp these, but also strengthen all of these ancillary aspects that are needed. And that's where it just takes a long amount of time, but they don't cease to become potential sites. They will remain always potential sites. These are alongside the sea. So there is a very fine, delicate ecological balance also that needs to maintain at the edge. For example, the eastern waterfront, where the portlands happen, there are mud flats where flamingos come in. These are feeding grounds. There are the mangroves, which are the natural barrier, which need conservation. They have protected our city from, difficult climatic instances. So all of these become very potential in terms of urban ecology as well. And then they've had all of these cultural aspects like the fort. These are markers of our cultural history. So there are too many layers, and all of these put together definitely have a lot of potential.
So do you see that we can take these ahead, or the younger generation, or the future practitioners? So
that will be the future, because otherwise where is the space other than the redevelopment? This is the space which is the promising aspect. And be it architecture or be it landscape, these are the areas that will be very potential.
Yeah. And also you talked about skyward development, what is happening right now, and we are having very small land parcels that are available on ground, so to say, open spaces. So as we go higher, these open spaces are also moving higher. We are having podium levels, open spaces. We are having amenities on terrace tops. So once a person starts living at 21st floor or 30th floor, he automatically loses his connection with the ground, and he gets connected with what he sees from his balcony or whatever plants he has in his balcony. So this disconnect is very, I think this disconnect, as in this distance, is so long to get again, to reconnect them with each other. So how do you see these kind of changes that are happening right now, and we look at environment or the nature only as part of our weekends? So how do you take also in the studios and you?
So this is the truth actually. So for example, I've been to this one building which is a very high-end address in Lower Parel.
Okay.
And we were really looking forward to this very beautiful house with a beautiful view. And then you go out onto the deck, it's a high-end building. You go out onto the deck, and all that you see is concrete and steel and concrete and glass and windows
and
around.
People admire that as a view.
Yes, and then where is the ground? That's far below. Where is the greenery? They don't allow you to put that probably in the balconies or whatever. And then is this what you're paying for? You can't listen to a vendor calling out, or you can't hear
Yeah.
people call you out from from the ground, which used to happen earlier.
Correct.
The neighborhood was made up of all these sounds, right? The intangibles, the life that was there on the streets. You are totally disconnected from all this. So then what is a way in which you may be able to mitigate all of these? Can you create vertical gardens? What Singapore has done, what China is doing. Can you have gardens in the multi-story building, the greens? And do you need it? I mean, the question is, do you need it? Of
Right.
course you need it. There are the whole idea of biophilia, where just connect with nature allows you to reinvent and rejuvenate yourself. And it's not only for yourself, it is so that you have better productivity. End of the day, you are also having a lot of wellness aspects imbibed because you have been seeing the greens and the nature all the time.
Right.
So this is essential. There is no escape to that. You cannot say that I will see greens only on my weekend. They are a part of your lifestyle and they are essential. So yes, upward or green towers or biophilic designs could be the answer to these kind of issues that we are right now facing.
So, in your opinion, what are the biggest challenges and opportunities you see in working towards brownfields in the cities like Mumbai?
So, like we said, the mill lands or the port lands are the brown fields. There was already development there. Today, they have become redundant. There are dilapidated structures. There has been probably a lot of pollution that the earlier land users have created, and they have leached into the ground and they have become brown fields. Now, do we really have so many green fields to work with in the city today? We don't.
No.
Because everything is perpetually getting built given the high land values. So then these brown fields are those which have the maximum potential.
Correct.
But they come with a set of challenges as well as opportunities. The challenge is because probably if there were industries there, there has been seepage of or leaching of certain chemicals down into the land, or certain surface pollutants that have settled onto it, or debris of construction, or different aspects which have led to the pollution. There has been infrastructure in this area which was sufficing that particular land use. But with a new land use, it is going to be redundant and it needs to be reinvented or redone. So there's a lot of investment that will go in it. So also there will be a lot of complex governance aspects. Like I said, the BPT may own the land, but various regulations will be imposed upon it for any kind of development. And that has to comply to all of these. The CRZ may be in picture because it's in proximity of the sea and so on. That applies for the portlands. For mill lands, likewise, there have been different activities that have happened. And the land may not be as potential for growing, say, trees, etc. So then what are those opportunities? The opportunities are that there are certain memories that these lands had. There were certain people who were associated with it. There are certain cultural markers that can be retained so that those people still feel connected to the place.
Right.
But they also have a sense of attachment. So they could become very silent stakeholders, or safeguard the space or maintain the spaces if they are very actively engaged. The potential is that it can allow urban regeneration, like it is being explored anyways in terms of the kind of redevelopment projects that are being proposed. There is potential of ecology being generated. So now here, because it's a brown field, you're not really going to some area which had very dense ecosystem thriving, and you're not disturbing that. You're not disturbing the topsoil and then trying to inflict your design over there. You are working with something that is degraded, and you're evolving a whole new ecology and a whole new system, which is obviously going to be very future oriented and potential and sustainable for the future. So
Correct.
it is like reviving all of these spaces. So probably you could have a lot of meetings, involve the stakeholders. You could have a lot of awareness camps and make people realize that you're working with them. They may become a part of your design process. That makes them feel even more attached. Once things shape up, they could be the stewards of that space, and they may further continue to silently take care of these spaces. A lot of these were Portlands. People were even labor class as well as all higher grade people, but they had a lot of these maidans which used to be political or democratic platforms where they would meet and probably have their union meetings and things, and it still happens in
Yeah.
Five Garden area,
Yeah, I
etc.
was about to say.
So,
Also
yeah.
in Dadar, I think it is
Yes.
Veer.
The Kotwal Udyan.
Yeah, Veer Kotwal
They
Udyan.
still do that.
Yeah.
So what are these public spaces? These are where you can just be yourself, where you can meet, where you can have events like this, a larger group, a smaller group, and individual spaces where one person can just sit and probably do nothing, just sit and contemplate life decisions, right? Or just do nothing. So public spaces are those which will allow you to do all of these. So there is so much more potential to spaces like these. You've got certain memories, you've come there, sat, just watch someone else do something, maybe play or maybe politically discuss something. So right from the smallest of an individual to a large scale community gathering, these spaces are which can allow a lot of communal activities, and that becomes the prime potential of that land, how they are keeping the users engaged.
Correct. So, in your teaching, how do you encourage students to absorb these things that are going around them, and what are the kind of exercises or what are the kind of assignments that you give your students to come across these solutions and problems?
So we are now dealing with undergraduate students, right? They are not the master students that I'm teaching. So they just need an exposure to what is landscape. But they are not necessarily widely traveled at this stage of time. They may not understand a very, very large regional approach to landscape or a very large scale project. So these spaces with which they have also been a part of use are what they can relate to. So a lot of our assignments are curated such that the students can visit these spaces often, understand how users are engaging with the space at different times of the day, in different seasons, if possible, how different age groups work, how different genders work, how differently abled work or move around within the same space. For example, right now we are working with one edge of Shivaji Park, the Samarth Vyayam Mandir. There are certain spaces in between. There's a Bengal club. There are festive activities. There are cultural activities. There is a commercial hall, scout pavilion. So they have their own set of exhibitions and all of that. There are multiple types of users. Apart from that, there are locals who come there for a walk every single day, who will stop over at the temple. There are like so many activities. So we encourage students to study these, the people and how they are using the space. But at the same time, we also encourage them to understand the space qualities. So these smaller spaces, or say a small garden, what kind of space qualities? Are there zones that are created? Does the kids zone happen next to a senior citizen zone? So are the grandparents able to keep a check on when the kids are playing? So is the zoning strategically aligned like that? Are certain trees creating enclosures? Are certain tall trees near to a wall where the roots may damage the wall, or where that wall may not allow the foliage to really spread out to its best capacity? Is there a sense of enclosure that where someone wants to find a cozy spot, they can go and sit there? Or is there like a large space where you just want to filter in sunlight and just want to bask in that? So what are these different characters of space? what is the materiality and how does that work, or how does it define zones, for example, again. Then how does vegetation work? What are the different kinds of plants? Are there natives that are used, or are there non-native varieties which may not thrive as much, or which are not attracting butterflies, for example?
Correct.
So maybe a butterfly attracting plant pocket somewhere near the kids play area will keep kids engaged there as
Right.
well. There's some newness that will be there every time. Also, we encourage students to understand seasonal variations. Some trees which might flower in a particular season, sometimes they'll shed leaves in a particular season, but probably create a whole layer of leaf litter below, on which if you walk, there is a different sense of a different sound that is also soothing.
Correct.
Or sometimes it's just looked upon as a little messy kind of an area.
Correct.
So what are all these smaller detailed aspects of an open space? We encourage students to study that. Last year we had studied the courtyard of Phoenix, and our students had come up with
Phoenix Mall.
Phoenix Mall.
Okay.
So our students came up with this really interesting study where they went macro level, and they've also done mapping of which are the areas where temperatures are cooler because the openings and exits of shops open into that. So then which are the warmer zones, where are the shadows falling, so which is the area which could be used for what purpose. So students actually end up going as detailed as that, and this generation is so apt with the technologies and with various software mapping. So they come up with these really interesting solutions. In terms of teaching, I had also conducted an elective once, which was called Wilderness Around. So just the idea of wilderness, what is it? What is wilderness? It's something that just grows randomly by itself. Nobody's planted it. Is it essential in a city? Do we really need always very nicely pruned, manicured gardens, or something just growing wildly also works?
Correct.
It does, because it just is a break from your routine pattern. Your life is so full of a typical pattern. Every work you do is very patterned and systematic. So this gives you an opportunity to just observe things which are not in a pattern, and that soothes you, right? So there are smaller interventions like these which we encourage students to study. Students also have been studying slope analysis and site understanding. So that also allows them to ensure that minimum intervention is done on the site, so that they can really protect the site and very smartly and strategically decide where that build form is. And this is not just related to students of landscape. They can practice this in every architectural design project. They can really take this up in their thesis projects and beyond once they move on to practice. So this becomes very crucial, I think, at this phase where they're not sure whether they want to be a landscape architect. They are still looking at being a good architect.
Correct.
But at the same time, it has inherently impacted their understanding of the site, the context, the vegetation, everything around them.
Yeah. So do you think the small interventions of such things make a huge difference on the design philosophy of young generation and also the practitioners?
It does, because anything that they research and study or observe and personally imbibe in, they will carry forward as their philosophy, or their philosophy will be modeled around that. Things that have really impacted them or touched their heart is what they will aim at pursuing eventually. So if they become more conscious about all of these small gestures of sustainability, for example, like say using lesser water, or planting so that it refrains or cuts down the glare, or kind of gives you a better environmental quality. It end of the day seeps down to your quality of life and how better or livable your place is. So if they have been able to understand and notice this, then it will carry forward in terms of their design philosophy for life. And so sustainability is not something like a value addition.
Correct.
It's a part of life. It has to be just continued and lived on.
So, as you said, from different kind of exercises and assignments, students get to understand how to, methodologies of site study and how to uh, study the surroundings and what to, take that as interventions from the for the design. But these underestimated design technologies or ideologies are something that you can elaborate upon.
So there are a lot of doing a very typical physical survey is one of the things. There are also a lot of data that students study, and we encourage them to do a lot of analysis. Like for example, this is a very typical case where they will bring a temperature chart or they will bring wind patterns. But it's not always true for every space. If you actually stand on the site, because of the presence of buildings, your wind path is not typically the southwest.
Correct.
It will be channelized from different areas and it will move differently. What is the repercussion of the temperature? I mean, are you understanding? Is it impacting? Do you need to lower it down? Then how will you lower? So we try to imbibe a lot of analytical skills in the students, which they of course carry forward. But apart from this, now there are so many other initiatives in this department. Just social media, for example, if they really decide to use it wisely, there are so many people who are talking about wild, say trails, nature trails. You don't need to do it only in a monsoon, or you don't need to
Right.
do it only over a weekend. These have become a part of lifestyle,
Correct.
just for the sake of wellness, because you get connected back to the earth, you get connected back to nature, trees. So a lot of parents also encourage younger children to attend all of these. There are so many eco resorts which have come, which also have biodiversity. They
Right.
also have maybe animal rearing or things, and they make young children understand all of these things. So there are so many options of exposure that now young kids have. There are these foraging events which keep happening in certain seasons, where a lot of architects that even we know of, they have set up these small weekend houses kind of spaces. They have created or empowered the local community, taken help of tribes or tribal people within a jungle. They go hunting for all of these edible fruits. They forage all the edible fruits, come back, they cook that same meal and they provide it. So it's just a day long trip. There are chefs who have become so aware about the local foods, which also a lot of the foods are from the wild. And there are so many recipes that you can create out of that. So that just brings me to this, the wilderness around elective that I had done. One day was just reserved for wild foods. And there were some kids from Rajasthan who spoke about Kher Sangri. There was someone from Maharashtra who talked about Sheola and things like these, which you don't get very regularly in the market,
Right.
which are very incidental and very seasonal, but which are very, very interesting, come with high nutritional value. So there are chefs who have started exploring all of these foods. So the young kids today have lots of avenues to actually understand environment and
Right.
ecology around that. And these are the stewards of our profession, right? These are people who are going to make earth a better place tomorrow. So if they are exposed to all of these things, they are definitely going to imbibe it somewhere in their mind, and become responsible citizens and take care of it, and make Earth a better
Correct.
place
And architecture
tomorrow.
is all about exposure.
Yes,
Yes.
exposure and the experience.
Correct.
So it's not just the food, or it's not just the taste, but
Mm.
also how it looks, and also how
Correct.
it feels, and end of the day, does it really satisfy your soul?
Yeah.
And it does, because it has been so inherent to our
Right.
system.
Yeah, it is not always about visual connection of the spaces. It is
Yes.
also notional
Yes,
many of the
it's
times.
also the emotion.
Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for joining us today. It was such a great time that I had in conversation with you.
Thank you, it was my pleasure, totally.
Thank you. I hope you all have realized how landscape improves your quality of life. So, for more such conversations about the field, do like, comment, share, and subscribe to the channel.